introverted ball here. All right. Okay, wait. No, yes, okay. What the bleep is God? No, what is it exactly? I feel like I'm a broken record at this point, trying to explain the problems to people over and over again. But whatever, I'll do it again. Whatever, okay. Everyone, it seems, or many, have different ideas about what this word is. There's analogies used all the time for different versions of different types, different ideas of God. And all sorts of excuses made for why they're different. And, well, as long as everyone generally believes that there's a greater power that we're all calling that greater power something. Well, there's a greater power. Okay, we're disagreeing on the type of greater power it is, but we all believe there's a greater power. Well, okay, a lot of us believe there's a greater power, so there must be a greater power. No, that's not how things work. Just because people believe in it doesn't make it true. But people love the appeal to majority fallacy. But 90% of the world believes in God. Well, no, it doesn't, because the word God means something different for each person, and or different religions, different sects, different. There might be a consensus of some degree of what God means to this group and this group and that group, but there's still differences, and those differences might be minor or extraordinarily significant. But what is it? More importantly, how do we know what it is? This is a question that I don't know has been really addressed by the apologist who makes the arguments for God. When considering any actual object in the actual real world that we can visually see and test, it becomes a lot harder to conceptualize a God in comparison. So my little glowy ball of God thingy that I have here is something that each of us could describe in detail, written down. And we would all have basically, I think, the same exact description of it, if not a very close description of it to each other. And even different languages doing this would come to the same conclusions about it, because you can see it. Just seeing it, you can make descriptions about it that would agree with each other. But being able to hold it, manipulate it, and test it, and smell it, and whatever, would give you far more data to work with. And so we then label the object whatever we label it as, and we say, well, that's what that is, and we've come to that. This is what it means to be a spiky, glowy ball. And we've come to that after seeing the object. But I think that God works in reverse. The definition comes first before the thing is there to look at. Perhaps because the thing to look at is an idea, a concept in the brain. So you can't examine it in this way. And some say, well, yeah, that's what God is. God is something that you cannot, it's not like this. It's the opposite of that. It's not that. It's not anything physical. So you can't point to it. And I'm like, well, but you decided that based on what? that God is this thing that I'm now defining into existence rather than seeing it and then giving it a definition. So are we really saying that the thing that we cannot see and cannot test in any meaningful way, that whatever that is what God is, and that's the definition of God? But then different people have different definitions to that word. So then what? How do we resolve that? By appealing to arguments? If they were valid and sound, that'd be great, but they aren't. So that's a problem. You might say, well, one argument out there might be valid and sound. Yeah, well, I haven't found it yet. So I'm waiting. I haven't, but let's resolve this question. How do we know? How does anybody know that this thing that we're calling, you say, a higher power? What do you mean by that? Higher power? Power? What does that mean? What does that mean? More ability? More control over the physical universe than us? I mean, what is it you're talking about? Because you can say that anything, I can say this is God, and somebody else might say, well, no, that's not God. You have the wrong shape. This is actually God, and this is not God, and so you got it wrong. And so I'm like, but yeah, but how did you determine what God was when there's no example of it? Then that the problem is that there's no example of it. It's like, well, the thing that there's no example of, that's what God is. Okay. But then person over there doesn't agree with that there's no example of God, because they'll say, no, love is God. God is love. Okay, so an emotion that I feel directed at someone or something. Okay, so is it romantic love? Is it family love? Is it the sort of love that I have for objects or toys? Or no, it's supposed to be a different kind of love. It's supposed to be an all-encompassing love. Okay, so it's not like any of the love that I'm familiar with. It's a whole different type of love. So then why do you use the word love then? Because it's a metaphor. It's an analogy. And you will see analogy is often the recourse of the apologist, because God needs it, because it's not analogous to anything really, but we can try to make it seem like it is. And then it's like, it's kind of like this, but it's not like that, but that's kind of, so it's an appeal to analogy at that point. And I just say, well, what is God? Igtheism. What's igtheism? Igtheist or igtheism is the idea that the question of the existence of God is meaningless because the word God has no coherent and unambiguous definition. Now, in part, I kind of favor igtheism. I kind of agree with this idea in a way. I don't think it's meaningless, but I do think it's very difficult to underline what the word God means, and therefore asking if it is a thing becomes a difficult thing. But I'm even asking how you decide what the word is, and that's something that seems up to the person that's coming up with the idea. Yeah, well, that's possible. Ivan Van Vitten. I think most people refer to intuition, a personal experience, a personal revelation as their basis for belief, like someone in a near-death experience and think it it revealed God to them. Yeah, well, yeah, that might be part of it. It's like my personal experience X that I can't explain because I've never had it before. That's God, and that's what God becomes, is that feeling that you have. But it's like, well, why is that God? What is God? Is God just that feeling, or is it? How did you? So it's what I see as the definition of God is secondary. It comes first, and then you go, okay, that's what God is. It's that I just defined it, and there it is. That's what. But that is exactly the same thing that we do with objects of the mind. And here it gets a little bit hazy, so try to I'll try to not completely lose my mind on it either. So objects of the mind are things that exist only in our yours and mine mind. They don't exist out here. And there's no metaphysical way that they exist. That's just silly. So examples of objects of the mind are letters, numbers, musical notes, words. Uh, so those are universals. Those are all objects of the mind. So you might, what's the universal in case you don't know, just in case. So a universal is triangle. That's an example of a universal. But when you draw a triangle, you can't draw a triangle. You can only draw a particular type of triangle. That's a particular version of a triangle that now has a particular name for it. So the concept of triangle is the object of the mind, whereas the particular type is something that we can draw and perhaps see things that are triangle shaped in nature, but there is no triangle that you can pick from the ground and eat. So that is an object of the mind. If minds stopped being, the idea triangle wouldn't be anymore. There would still be things shaped like triangles, but nobody be around to call them triangles. So anything that disappears if if all assuming that humans are the only intelligence in the universe, and goodness hopes that's not the case, but uh, but assuming that for the moment, if we vanish, the and that thing would vanish, and that's an object of the mind. So the classic, the tree falls in the woods and nobody's around, does it make a sound? The answer is yes, it makes a sound, because sound is independent from humans existing. And there's ways to demonstrate that sound exists. And you say, but if we're not around, then nobody's around to hear that it happened. It's like, that doesn't matter. It still happens because that's the way things work. You go, well, but if nobody was around to see it, then nobody would be around to comment on it, right? Well, yeah, but we know that it makes a sound, and here's how we can know that. Contrast that to whatever God is, and we can't seem to know much about it, if anything. So here's a website that talks about different types of gods. Triple goddesses. Sound familiar? This is an ancient archetype. Many religions have a triple deity of some sort. Good luck even pronouncing that. Psychophomps. Guide of souls. Deities that guide the dead. Primordial gods. They exist as the unknowable power that created the world. Celestial gods. gods that rule the heavenly bodies, cultural heroes that become deified. Uh, they're 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 like, or they're trickster deities. Loki is an example. Prometheus, death gods. Yeah, this is or death angel. Like you have the death rides a pale horse. Uh, death gods are found in different pantheons. Uh, Cylindrical and liminal deities. Uh, so they're gods of boundaries, change, cycles, personification, or daimons. Rustic or nature gods, craft or civilized gods, tutelary gods, and there's probably more, but that's 11 to start with. And so already you can now, maybe a god includes all those types of gods within it. So you mash all those types of gods into one idea of God. But why are those things God? Those are all aspects of nature to some degree or the other. All of those things can be explained by natural phenomena. Why do we, what is this thing that we're calling? Why do we call it this other name? It's a substitute for the unknown. And I've got this video over here that I kind of want to look at. But I kind of also want to give him time to do a part 2, because I'm not sure where he's going with it. And this channel called Logic and Philosophy, and I looked at his channel. He's actually got some stuff about logic on the channel, so props for that. He's going over this horrible argument called the argument from common consent, and he blasts out the bad versions of it. Although I would harp more on how bad these versions of it are. He gives a ton of analogies, which I find to be questionable. He repeats a lot of the prior information before making the best version or a better version of the argument. I don't know if it's the best version of this argument. And he goes over arguments against the argument. There's the best version. And he goes to this version of the argument. So he knows that the argument's flawed, and it seems like he's trying to make it better. I'm not sure why you would. I mean, this argument's broken. I don't think there's a way to fix the argument. But he continues on, and that's the video. And I thought, well, I could point out all the fallacies here. He's pointed out some of them, sort of, but he's not harping on them as much as I would, because this is nothing more than an appeal to majority. That's all it is. Because P4 is that fallacy. P4 is the fallacy of an appeal to majority. I don't know why you would ever use this argument for anything, period. Because most people believing anything doesn't make that true, nor does it make it false. It just doesn't matter if people believe or don't believe. It's either true or false, independent of how many people agree. And so that's just, I don't know why you'd have to get rid of that completely to make it, to even have a hope for it to be. Yeah, but he goes on, with complaints against it. And then he says he actually argues in favor of a logical fallacy. So he's trying to justify, or feels like he's trying to justify, the appeal to majority. And it's like, why and then he more analogies, and then more counters and all that. So, and then he does this thing with at the end that I don't know. It's supposed to be fun. I don't under, but so it's an introduction. So I kind of feel like giving him the benefit of doubt and waiting for part 2 before I, you know, railroad across this and point out all the fallacies, because it seems like he knows fallacies, so he must be going somewhere with this. I don't know. So I guess we'll see. Who knows? All right. That's almost about it, I guess. Yeah, for this particular video of what God is, or what is God, and me trying to say this is a problem that as far as I can see is unresolved and perhaps unresolvable, unless someone wants to admit that God is an object of the mind, and that's why there's all these different ideas of what God is. It's because God is just this concept that different, that it's like it's a fill-in for words, and you know, God is like this or God is like that, and it's like, well, then you don't, then just say that word. You don't need, you know, it just doesn't, it's not helpful. So let me know what you think God is. What is it? If you think it's anything at all, or what you think it isn't. Maybe that will help. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. And this was my face on camera because I haven't done that in a while. So, yeah.